The wind howled across the barren desert plain, dragging dust like a shroud over the sun-baked earth. Samantha's truck rattled along a narrow dirt road, its wheels grinding over stones as though protesting the weight of her journey. She kept one hand tightly gripped on the steering wheel, the other cradling a thermos of coffee gone cold. Her eyes, shadowed by the brim of a weathered hat, scanned the horizon with quiet desperation. The landscape offered nothing but heat and desolation. No houses, no people, just the rust-orange soil stretching to the horizon, broken only by a distant bluff and the faint outline of juniper trees. It should have felt peaceful, but to Samantha, it was a vacuum, a world emptied of everything she used to be. The radio was off. It had been for hours. Silence was easier than the memories waiting in songs or static. She hadn't planned to come back here, not really. But grief has a way of driving you in circles, and eventually, hers led her back to where it all began. Her father's abandoned ranch, long since swallowed by time and desert. A sudden movement caught her eye. A blur of motion just off the roadside, near a low gully. She slowed the truck, leaning forward, squinting into the shimmering heat waves. There, collapsed in the dirt, limbs twisted and flanks heaving, lay a foal. Samantha braked hard. Dust rose like smoke as the truck groaned to a halt. She threw open the door, boots hitting the earth with a thud. Her heart pounded. It wasn't just the shock of seeing an injured animal. It was something deeper, instinctual. The kind of urgency that erases doubt. The foal was tiny, no more than a few days old. Its coat, a pale chestnut streaked with dirt and blood, clung tightly to its bony frame. Flies hovered near its eyes, which blinked slowly, as if sleep were more tempting than life. It tried to lift its head, but only managed a pitiful twitch. She knelt beside it, one hand hovering inches above its flank, careful not to startle it. "Hey," she whispered. "It's all right. I've got you." Its breathing was shallow, uneven. Heat stroke, injury, abandonment. Her mind raced through possibilities as her fingers found the foal's pulse, faint, but there. And then she heard it, a distant rumble. Not thunder. Hoofbeats. She looked up. Atop the ridge, emerging like spirits from the haze, stood a Mustang herd, 20, maybe 30 strong. Dust swirled around their legs. Eyes locked on her. At the center stood a stallion, massive, dark, and alert. Nostrils flared, ears pinned forward. Samantha froze. She'd seen wild horses before, but never like this. Not this close. Not with this much tension hanging in the air. The stallion stepped forward. She could feel the intent in his movement, protective, calculating. His gaze flicked from her to the foal, and back. Samantha slowly raised her hands, palms up. "I'm not here to hurt him," she said quietly, not expecting them to understand but saying it anyway. The herd didn't move. Their stillness made them feel almost unreal, like a mirage. But their eyes tracked her every breath. Samantha glanced back at the foal. It shivered, weakly trying to rise. Then a sharp whinny cut through the air. A mare stepped forward from the herd, her coat a silver gray mottled with dust and streaks of red along her flank. She called again, mournfully. Samantha understood. This was the mother. The foal lifted its head at the sound, but couldn't rise. Samantha bit her lip. Time was against them. If it didn't get fluid soon, the foal would die. She looked between the mare and the herd, then back at the foal. "All right," she murmured. "We're doing this together." Moving slowly, she took off her denim jacket and draped it over the foal. The little body flinched, but didn't resist. She slid her arms beneath its belly and legs, feeling the frightening lightness of its frame. Carefully, she lifted. The foal whimpered, barely audible over the wind. She turned, facing the truck and the herd beyond. The stallion took a step closer. The others shifted, restless. Her heart hammered in her chest. "I'm helping him," she said again louder. "I'm taking him to water. You can follow if you want, but don't stop me." For a second, the stallion didn't move. Then he tossed his head once, not in aggression, but something else. A signal. The mare neighed sharply and backed away. The stallion did not charge. Samantha began walking. Every step felt like an eternity. The foal's weight dragged at her arms. Sweat poured down her back. But she didn't stop. She reached the truck, gently laid the foal across the blanket in the back seat, and climbed behind the wheel. As the engine turned over, she risked one glance at the ridge. The herd remained still, but every single one of them was watching her. She didn't know why they let her go. She only knew they had. The truck pulled away in a cloud of dust, heading toward the ranch beyond the hills. In the rearview mirror, the silhouettes of wild horses blurred into the heat waves, unmoving, like statues carved by wind and silence. She didn't know what would happen next, but somewhere between the first hoofbeat and the last heartbeat, something had changed. Not just for the foal, for her too, and that terrified her more than anything. The barn groaned with age as Samantha pushed open the wooden doors, hinges creaking like weary joints. Dust billowed in shafts of amber light, catching motes that danced in silence. The space hadn't seen life in years, not since her father passed, not since she turned her back on this place. But now, it would have to serve one more time. She laid the foal gently on a blanket in the corner stall. The little creature twitched, weak but conscious, ribs rising and falling in fragile rhythm. Samantha knelt beside him, brushing aside the grime clinging to his coat. A dark crust of dried blood clung to one hind leg. Not deep but raw. His breathing was ragged, lips dry, tongue curled at the edge of his mouth. She grabbed a plastic jug of water and a plastic syringe from her first aid kit. Slowly, she pressed the tip between his lips, squeezing gently. At first, he refused, turning his head away, but her hand remained steady, patient, encouraging. "Come on, Dusty," she murmured, giving him a name without even thinking. "You've made it this far." After a moment, he accepted the water. It was a small victory, but to Samantha, it felt monumental. Days blurred into one another. Mornings bled into nights without rhythm or rest. She barely ate, slept in fits, always listening for the shallow huff of Dusty's breath, the scrape of his hooves, the soft whimper of pain. But he was fighting, and so was she. She hung blankets over the open doors, keeping out the worst of the sun. Old fans hummed like sleepy insects. She checked his vitals, cleaned wounds, massaged his legs to prevent stiffness. In return, he watched her, not with fear, but with a growing trust. Eyes like old amber, calm and observant, as though studying her soul. It wasn't just caretaking. It was connection. Sometimes, in the quietest moments, she sang. Her voice was rough, rusted by years of silence, but the old lullabies came back with haunting clarity. Songs her mother used to hum on stormy nights. Songs she and her sister had giggled through under warm blankets, tucked between hay bales after long rides. Her sister. That memory hit harder than she expected. It came one afternoon, as Dusty stood for the first time without wobbling. He took 2 shaky steps toward her, stumbled, and caught himself. A rush of joy surged through her, but it caught in her throat. Instead of smiling, she turned away and sat in the dirt, covering her face with her hands. The last time she had felt that same joy was 3 years ago, when her sister had landed a perfect jump on the trail. The next moment, her horse had slipped. Broken leg, broken neck, broken promises. Samantha had watched helplessly from behind, frozen, screaming. Afterward, she swore she'd never work with horses again. She left everything, her practice, her home, even this ranch, shut the door on it all. And yet, here she was. Dusty nuzzled her shoulder gently, sensing something. She let the tears fall then, for the first time in years, not loud or dramatic, just silent drops that mixed with sweat and dust on her cheeks. "You're not supposed to fix me," she whispered. "That's not your job." Outside, cicadas buzzed in the brittle heat. A hawk circled high above, casting its shadow across the earth like a fleeting memory. The world spun on, indifferent, but something shifted inside Samantha. She cleaned up the tools, refolded the blankets, straightened the bales. She opened the shuttered windows to let light in. It was subtle, almost invisible, but the barn was starting to live again. That evening, she stepped outside to stretch and paused. Hoof prints. Fresh. Not Dusty's. These were larger. Multiple sets. Leading right up to the barn and circling it. She turned quickly, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved, but the back of her neck prickled. A coincidence? Maybe. But the tracks hadn't been there yesterday. The next morning, they returned. And the one after that, she never heard them, never saw them. But something, or someone, was coming close. Part of her felt fear, but another part felt something else. A stirring in her gut. The same feeling she had that night in the storm when the herd had let her walk away. That inexplicable pause. That quiet decision. One night, the wind died down early. The stars blinked above the desert like ancient watchers. Samantha sat outside with Dusty lying nearby on a bed of straw, chewing contentedly. The stillness was almost sacred. Then a sound, so soft it could have been imagined. A distant whinny. Dusty lifted his head. Alert. Ears perked. Samantha stood slowly, her pulse quickening. The cry came again, closer now. Answering it, from far off, came another, deeper call. She stepped beyond the barn, eyes scanning the brush and hills. Nothing. But Dusty didn't take his eyes off the horizon. He remembered. The next morning, he was restless, pacing, sniffing at the walls, the air, the door. "You want to go?" she said softly. He paused, looking at her. Not begging, not pleading, just waiting for her to understand. And she did. But she wasn't ready. Later that day, she found an old photo tucked in the medicine cabinet drawer. Her and her sister at age 14, both laughing, each holding a foal by its lead. That memory, it didn't hurt the same way anymore. It had softened around the edges, like leather broken in. Samantha sat beside Dusty that night, brushing his coat under the lamplight. He had filled out. His wounds were nearly gone. He walked easily, even playfully now. But the look in his eyes had changed. He wasn't hers. Not really. She ran her hand along his neck, resting her head lightly against his. "I saved you," she whispered. "But maybe you're saving me too." Outside, something moved beyond the fence. This time, she didn't look away. She watched the shadows shift between trees. Then another. A flicker of a white mane in the moonlight. A pause. The herd had returned, and they were waiting. The night air was cooler than usual, carrying the scent of sage and something less familiar, musk, wildness, presence. Samantha stood at the threshold of the barn, her hand resting lightly on the old wooden frame. Dusty was at her side, unusually alert. His ears flicked forward, nostrils wide as he sniffed the air. He paced once in a tight circle, then stood rigid, head turned toward the tree line. Then, like ghosts forming from the dark, the Mustangs emerged. They were silent, their movement fluid, almost reverent. Moonlight danced across their coats, some dappled, others dark and glinting with sweat. The lead stallion stepped forward, hooves barely making a sound against the earth. His eyes, fierce and intelligent, met Samantha's without fear. Dusty let out a quiet whicker, not of warning, of recognition. The silver mare followed closely behind the stallion. Her body had healed since Samantha last saw her. The red streaks of injury now faded scars. She called softly, a low, wavering note carried on the wind. Dusty answered, stepping forward instinctively. Samantha reached for him, fingers brushing his flank. "Wait," she whispered. But he didn't stop. His steps were tentative, but certain. He moved past the gate, into the open yard, the distance between him and the herd narrowing. Samantha's heart twisted. This was what she had prepared him for. Health, strength, freedom. But now that the moment was here, she felt like the ground beneath her was giving way. Dusty paused halfway, turning his head to look at her. His eyes glimmered with something ancient, understanding. The stallion huffed and pawed the ground, not in challenge, but in ceremony. The mare stepped forward again. Dusty took another step. Samantha stepped out as well, arms loose by her sides, breath shallow. "Is this what you want?" she murmured. He looked at her for a moment longer, then moved forward, closing the space between himself and the herd. The mare approached, nuzzling him gently, her breath warming his face. Dusty leaned into her, a soft exhale slipping from his lips. And then, just as quickly, he turned and trotted back to Samantha. Her chest rose sharply, stunned. He pressed his forehead against her stomach, standing still, warm, solid. Samantha dropped to one knee and held him there. "You're not ready," she whispered. "Or maybe I'm not." Behind them, the herd waited, silent but patient. No movement, no threat. Dusty pulled back gently and trotted to the fence again, then back to her, pacing. She understood. He wasn't choosing between two lives. He was caught between them. Over the next few days, the herd remained close. They came at dusk and lingered till dawn, never breaching the fence, never pressing too near. Just watching, always watching. Samantha worked with Dusty, leading him farther from the barn each time. First to the water trough near the woods, then to the creek bed where she first found him. He never resisted, but he always turned back to her, not out of dependence, out of something deeper, respect, maybe even love. And yet, each night, he stood longer near the edge of the pasture, listening for the herd's distant calls. His tail flicked anxiously. His muscles twitched with energy. He was growing restless. She saw it in his strides, strong, purposeful, ready. That evening, Samantha sat in the barn doorway with Dusty lying near her, head resting on her lap. She stroked the curve of his neck, fingers drawing slow circles in his fur. "I don't want to lose you," she said softly, "but if I hold on any longer, it won't be for your sake." The stars above were clear and bright. Crickets sang in the tall grass, and the wind whispered low like the voice of something wise. "I was broken when I found you," she continued. "I thought saving you might fix something in me. But I see now you're not a bandage. You're a gift." Dusty let out a sigh and nuzzled into her arm. That night, she left the gate open, just wide enough. At dawn, she woke before the sun. The barn was quiet, too quiet. She stepped outside, boots crunching softly over dry grass. The pasture was empty. Her chest tightened. She crossed the field quickly, eyes scanning every shadow, every tree. Nothing. At the fence, hoof prints told the story. Dusty had left during the night. Tracks led beyond the boundary, past the creek, into the forest. She stood still for a long time, numb. No tears, no words, just the sound of her own breathing. But then, from the top of the ridge, came the sound she hadn't expected, the high, joyous cry of a foal. Not distressed, not afraid. Samantha looked up. There, framed by sunlight, just breaching the hills, stood Dusty. Beside him, the stallion and the silver mare. The herd behind them, still and serene. Dusty whinnied again, loud, confident. Then slowly, he turned and galloped down the other side of the hill. Gone. Samantha sat in the grass, stunned, heart both heavy and lifted. A strange calm settled over her. He had chosen not to leave her, to return to who he was meant to be. And somehow, that didn't feel like loss. It felt like completion. She stayed there as the sun climbed higher, warming her face. Around her, the desert hummed with quiet life, cicadas, birds, the rustle of wind in dry branches. When she finally rose, she walked back to the barn with slow, sure steps. And there, resting near the open gate, was something she hadn't expected. A new foal. Alone. Trembling. Samantha stopped in her tracks. It was younger than Dusty had been when she found him, barely old enough to stand. Its legs were knobby, its sides shallow, with hunger and fear. But it looked straight at her, eyes wide, unblinking. There were no hoof prints nearby, no signs of struggle, no mother, just the foal, waiting. She knelt slowly, one hand outstretched. It didn't run. Instead, the foal limped forward and placed its nose against her palm. She stared past it, to the ridge. Nothing. The herd was gone, but they had left something behind. Another beginning, another soul to care for. A whisper of wind passed through the barn rafters, lifting a strand of her hair. Samantha smiled. She didn't speak. There was no need. This story, hers and Dusty's, wasn't over. It had simply changed form. The foal stayed close to her over the next few days, never straying far from the barn, always following her footsteps with wide, uncertain eyes. Samantha named him Brave. It wasn't for courage he'd already shown, but for the courage she believed he would grow into. He was smaller than Dusty had been, softer around the edges, trembling when the wind picked up too quickly, or when birds scattered from trees. But there was strength beneath that fragility, a quiet will to live, to learn, to trust. Brave's arrival shifted something inside Samantha, something she hadn't realized was still unfinished. When Dusty left, he had taken with him the weight she'd carried for years. The guilt, the hesitation, the voice inside that told her she would never be enough. But Brave wasn't a replacement. He was a continuation, a reminder that healing wasn't a single act, but a commitment, a choice made again and again. She poured her days into him. Morning feedings, short walks through the field, brushing his coat until it gleamed beneath the desert sun. Each time he took a step without stumbling. Each time he came when she called, her sense of purpose deepened. The barn, once silent and abandoned, now echoed with life. Hoofbeats, low nickers, the occasional snort or restless shuffle of hay. News of her quiet work began to ripple through nearby towns. Locals remembered her father's ranch, once a sanctuary for wounded or unwanted animals. A place with no judgment, only patience. People began stopping by, first a man with a limping burro, then a teenager with an orphaned fawn. They came hesitantly, unsure if she was ready to take on more. She always said yes. The barn expanded its rhythm. Brave was never far from her side, watching as she tended to other creatures, absorbing the sounds, the smells, the calm confidence with which she moved. His presence was a grounding force, even as the world around her began to buzz with quiet energy again. One morning, as she led Brave to the field, he paused at the gate and stared toward the hills. The breeze was light, carrying with it a scent she had come to recognize: dust, sweat, sagebrush, and something older. Wild. Her eyes followed his line of sight. For a long moment, nothing stirred. Then, from the ridge, a silhouette emerged. Dusty. He stood tall, stronger than she remembered, his coat darkened with age, his stance proud and unwavering. Behind him, others gathered, part of the same herd, perhaps new ones. Wild horses, untamed and watchful, surrounded by wind and light. Samantha didn't move. Dusty whinnied once, deep and rich, echoing through the valley. Brave perked up, shifting beside her, hoofs twitching. She whispered, "That's him. That's where you come from." Brave didn't bolt. He didn't run toward the herd. He pressed closer to her side. Dusty stepped forward, but only a few paces. His head tilted, ears flicked. He was waiting for something. Samantha opened the gate, her hand resting lightly on Brave's shoulder. He looked up at her, unsure. "It's okay," she said. "Go if you want to. Or stay." Brave stepped forward, one slow pace at a time. He reached the edge of the field and paused, looking again at Dusty, then back at Samantha. Then, to her surprise, he turned and walked back toward the barn. Dusty didn't follow. He watched, motionless, and then, just as before, he turned with the herd and disappeared beyond the hills. Samantha stood in silence, her heart full and unbroken. She understood now. Dusty wasn't gone. He had never been. He had become what he was meant to be. And Brave was still finding his path. Seasons shifted. Summer softened into autumn, the desert light mellowing, the winds quieter now. The ranch grew. Fencing was repaired, old tools restored. The barn smelled of cedar oil, warm hay, and life. Visitors became regulars, schoolchildren, volunteers, even a few retired riders who offered their hands and stories. Samantha, once hidden from the world, now stood in the center of something reborn. She didn't lead with speeches or boast of her past. She worked quietly, taught gently, and listened more than she spoke. People noticed that about her, that she didn't demand to be seen, but was impossible to ignore. Brave, too, changed with time. He grew taller, his coat deepened in color, and the trembling stopped. He ran freely across the pasture now, his movements fluid and joyful. But he always returned to her, always circled back. One evening, after the sun dipped below the hills and the sky turned a bruised purple, she saddled him for the first time. He didn't flinch, didn't buck. He turned his head and looked at her with calm eyes, as if to say, "I'm ready." They rode together in silence, her legs pressed gently to his sides, hands loose on the reins. The wind tangled in her hair, and the stars blinked overhead. They climbed the ridge slowly, the same path she had watched Dusty take. At the top, she halted Brave and looked out across the valley. The barn below, golden in the lantern light, the open land stretching beyond it. A world full of memory, loss, and something more enduring. Possibility. In the distance, she thought she heard hoofbeats, soft, fading, eternal. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, Brave was still beneath her, breathing steady, strong. "I'm not lost anymore," she whispered. Not to her sister, not to her past, not to herself. They turned and descended the hill, the dust rising behind them like the final page of a long, hard story. But this was not the end. It was a beginning, one shaped by pain, forged in trust, and carried forward not on the back of a single wild horse, but in the bond between them all. The barn doors opened wide as they approached, the golden light spilling out to greet them, and inside, waiting quietly, was the next soul to be saved.